focus on a specific region, and there's a group of you that actually goes out to those regions and watches films, right?
Yes, there's about 15 of us, maybe a little more, maybe a little less depending on the year. Most of it's organized geographically. You do, like I have a region, I do the Nordic region, and I also do Canadian features with another programmer, and I also do the Philippines. It's just sort of happened that way. It wasn't like I picked a map and said I must do the Philippines and then the coldest countries I could find. It just sort of developed organically, and then a lot of people have much more specific locations. Like Cameron Bailey does India. He's our program director, or the director of the festival, and he also does a number of others. Piers Handling's always had an interest in European cinema. He's our CEO. And he tends to do French and Polish and Italian cinema. Jane Shuttle, who's been a programmer with us for about 15 years, does Australian, American, and Israeli films. So some of the we also have programmers who do specific genre films. There are types of films that I like less, but I also show those kinds of films depending on how they execute what they're trying to do. And then after that, you just really look at it in terms of how well it's made, how well it's acted, how well it's shot. Is the story is it something I didn't know before? Is there something unique about the way it was made, or unique about its approach to the subject? A really good. There's just. I'm not. When I was younger, I was way more into horror movies than I am now. It's sort of I get scared easily. Or I get bored and not scared. But there are certain genres that any programmer will prefer over others, and I would say definitely. Really, the majority of what we show, it tends to be what you'd consider to be art house. But the thing about Toronto. And the thing about showing foreign language films or international titles is that really when it crosses an ocean, it's effectively an art house film. Like, for instance, Life is Beautiful is perceived as an art house film, although a lot of people would not consider it like the pinnacle. One of the great things that about programming in Toronto is that it's such a multicultural city. It's so diverse that there's an audience for everything. I remember one of the first years I programmed was when the World Trade Center catastrophe happened, and we had an Albanian filmmaker who was trapped in his plane landed in the east coast of Canada, and he was stuck there for about 5 days, and finally he got to Toronto. And it was his last screening, and we were like really, everyone was exhausted, and we had to reschedule a day or two of the festival because we sort of shut it down when things happened. And the first screening, not very many people went, and he'd been obviously through such a horrible week, and everybody had, but he finally made it to Toronto, and we were like the last day. And we had no idea who was going to come. And he was in a big house. The film had played Cannes and done fairly well. But it wasn't a prize winner or anything. But it was a 600-seat house, and we walked in, and it was packed with Albanian Canadians, which I didn't know there was 600 Albanian Canadians in Toronto. And it turned out that the volunteer translator who was there to help him with the Q&A actually went to kindergarten with them. So like that, what doesn't happen all the time, but there's just a crowd for a lot of stuff, and with really wide-ranging interests, and it's because it's a big town, and it's a cultural town too. You can draw on a lot of stuff. There's a big Iranian population, a big Chinese population. there is a very active Icelandic cultural group that's always calling me a month before, asking me what Icelandic films are playing, and it's like we have to wait for the press release. But so there's a lot of stuff going on. Like I get like a lot of people trying to send me films directly, and that's not a great idea. Sometimes it'll wind up in a spam thing, and I'll never, you don't see it, or you don't see it on time. Because we do tend to, most of my programming is done on this trip, but I will wait, I will wait for certain films, but we tend to program as we go, because we have to put out a very large book, in September, a fairly substantial program book, and you have to keep things moving.
Yeah.
So you don't want to wait. If you're sending a film in, you don't want to wait till the last minute. You should always, that's the question I get the most, is usually when can I send my film in, and what are the repercussions if it's not done. As long as you send the film in and if it's not finished, we know where it is in terms of the production, what's missing. Sometimes it's effects, often it's music, some of the sound work isn't done. If we know, we can try to look past it. The best option, of course, is to send it absolutely 100% completed. Many programmers will tell you they can watch a film in various stages. I really wouldn't believe them. You want to get it as close as finished as possible, and make sure they know that what's missing, because it's a leap if it's not done.
So this is your advice, to try to send the film when it's ready.
So get it as close as possible already, but if it's, you should determine what's, like, if you need a week to do. Usually, most people will be sympathetic if you need a deadline extension, but you should ask for that first.
Yeah.
But if you don't, like if something really major can be done in a week, great. But if you're going to wait 3 weeks for a sound, like tweaking the sound. I wouldn't recommend that, because chances are the way films are often, the way films can be screened often on links, they're not always going to pick up those tweaks that you would in a theater. So,
So you've been coming here for what 10 years or so, more even?
a little more, yeah.
Maybe some.
I try not to count. I am a senior programmer, so yeah.
Right.
I didn't come up with that title, by the way. So.
No?
No, there's only 2 senior programmers, and we're both the exact same age. But he was a senior programmer way before me, so I don't know how that happened.
Okay. Like 10 years ago, and you have been following the Icelandic cinema for a long time, let's say. That's my question. So can you maybe talk a little bit about the changes and sort of what you are seeing happening here in those 10, 15 years that you have been covering Icelandic cinema?
Well, right now it's like an extremely exciting time. I think there's lots of great young filmmakers making a fairly wide range of stuff, and serious stuff. Like over the last 6 or 7 years, it's been really strong. Like films like Hearthstone and Under the Tree did really well. Swan did well in Toronto. I think it really started with Horses and When with Benedict Erlingson's film, and then it's sort of been on a roll. Like Rúnar Rúnarsson has made 2 great films, Volcano and Sparrows, and there's just been a lot of strong work. In addition to a lot of veterans still working, and some have left and done international productions. I mean, Balthazar's done a few, but they've come back and made very specific Icelandic stories too. So it's a really rich time. I would say what's been odd to see is that there's much more there. There's a lot more stuff that's sort of set in more rural areas than there was like 10 years ago. I think there was. Certainly like stuff like Hearthstone, not so much Under the Tree, but Swan and Sparrows. Although Sparrows is sort of a strange film because it's about somebody being sent to the country who doesn't want to go. So it's a more complicated thing than just and the same with Swan, I suppose, as well.
Yeah.
but that's been interesting and kind of cool to see. It's a lot of the stuff that when I started programming, it was very much about Reykjavik, like 101 and Icelandic Dream and Fiasco and those kind of films.
Yeah. So, let's say you have selected an Icelandic film, and the filmmaker is very happy. What happens when the film arrives? Film and the filmmaker arrives in Toronto.
Well, usually we try to. Hopefully, you're working with the institute, the various institutes, or your local institute. That'd probably be best. Hopefully, I mean, if you're coming to Toronto, it is a big and very competitive festival. So hopefully, you've got a sales agent in place, and you're not searching for a sales agent. That can happen, but it can. And it has happened. People got picked up subsequently. If not, you should definitely have some sort of publicist. There's lots of great publicists out there, and we can give you lists. Then you really have to target who you're gonna, because there's a lot of films and a lot of noise, and sometimes the press will be consumed with those bigger titles. Or some of the galas or whatever. You need to target those right away, and you also need to target who you want to see the film, like what distributors. You need to see the film. You should find out. You should research who's most likely to buy the film, who's purchased films like your film beforehand. And then you should also look at the festivals. Like I said, most of the major festivals are there, and a lot of the minor ones. And that can be very useful, especially if they're pursuing the film, because most of those do pay some sort of rental, which can be much more like lucrative than, going to a major festival can cost you money, but it can wind up being, you'll get rentals back, and the film will get out there, and often inclusion in a smaller festival will mean local distribution, or somewhere along the line, or even beforehand. So you should target those. Make sure you're. I usually recommend that people do like cast a fairly wide net, but then really zone in on the people who are most likely to take it. And that will be the first thing you do, and then you try to meet people and get them to. There's a lot of socializing that should be done, not too much socializing. Excessive like 3 or 4 a.m. socializing can backfire. There used to be things called producers reps that used to be useful and would. The one thing I would suggest is if you're representing the film yourself, you should try to get somebody. I wouldn't recommend just representing the film yourself unless you know, especially if you're younger. You should get somebody who knows those people, either the programmers or the distributors, because often people can be. It can seem a little direct if the director themselves, him or herself, is actually talking to somebody and pitching the film. That can make people feel awkward. The other thing is, no matter what festival you go to, you should always have. Even though your focus is on the film that's there, you should always go in with other projects, because there's many. We have a lot of talent agents, for instance, that come to Toronto, and they're interested. They're not just interested in the single project; they're interested in people's careers, and a lot of people can get signed. There's a bunch of directors we showed last year, and they wound up getting U.S. representation as a result of having screened in Toronto and people really responding to the films, and that can be very helpful further on in your career or immediately as well. So there's other ways. It's not. You should go in with like a multi strategy that has a number of different approaches as opposed to just being about the single film. Sort of rep is the best way. There are people. there's a local filmmaker in Toronto who would like just do super street level stuff. Her family is from Bratislava, so she would do everything like Bratislavan, and they're like they had like people in traditional costumes. So they got attention. They wound up having really big screenings. Her advice to people is always to like focus on. I think she's had 4 or 5 festivals, films at TIFF. She's a Toronto filmmaker, but you know, her advice is usually to focus on what you specifically want to get out of the screenings. And in some cases, it was I just want to have good screenings, and people will see me as a filmmaker to take seriously for the first one, and then subsequently it was. You know, I'm looking for distribution, and then I'm looking for more international distribution. You know, she had very specific goals, and you can see her career progress. It went from like super low budget stuff to like more medium budget stuff, and like less. She was very skilled at working with amateur actors, but now she's hiring more professional actors, a little more established. You know, but. I would think about those goals, but in terms of cutting through a lot of the din, a publicist is and you should have fairly serious meetings with publicists and find out what they're actually going to do for you, because the media landscape has changed rather radically. I used to be a publicist, and it's much harder now. There are a lot more. There are a lot of smaller publications and, you know, just web publications, but it can be tough to sort of get to generate stuff. You know, I mean, your publicist should also, you know, have some sort of background in social media and be able to like generate some noise that way as well.